Hello, welcome to Israel at the Crossroads, at a Crossroads, expanding the conversation. My name is Ellie Gettinger. I'm the Director of Outreach for the Center for Lifelong Learning at the Jewish Theological Seminary, and I'm really excited to be sharing our learning with you in another series. This series is exploring the themes that emerged at a recent program we had in person at JTS, Israel at a Crossroads, Navigating Religion, Democracy, and Justice. You can find more information about that on our website. And throughout this 2-day series, we looked at a lot of different issues around pluralism, issues around minority status and democracy and culture. And today we're going to take on some of those cultural elements and explore those with a beloved JTS alum, Rabbi Matt Berkowitz, who is now doing so much within the universe outside of JTS at the Schechter Institutes in Israel. So we are excited to be able to partner with Schechter to present this piece. I also want to say that this is incredibly timely. It is Yom HaAtzmaut and Yom HaZikaron this week. So we are excited to look at the way visual arts has evolved and continues to evolve in light of these commemorations that are coming up, and the way in which visual and material culture really buttress our sense of statehood. And so I'm excited to see where this goes. For the entire series, you can check out that in chat. We'll be meeting every Monday through May 19th. I want to thank everyone who made a donation as part of this process. Thank you for your support. It makes learning at JTS possible. If you'd like to sponsor a session, that is possible still. You can go to the link on our website, and it's a great way of commemorating an event or a loved one, and we would love to have you a part of our sponsor cohort. Now I'm going to jump into the program itself. The title of today's program is The Art of Zionist Thought and Israeli Identity. And again, our speaker today is Rabbi Matt Berkowitz. Rabbi Berkowitz is the incoming president of the Schechter Institutes Incorporated in Jerusalem. In addition to his rabbinic life, he is also an established artist, and he's the founding partner of Kol Ha'ot, a studio project that weaves art and Jewish learning together in compelling and cutting-edge ways. And we're going to see a bit of, that weaving today as we talk with Rabbi Berkowitz. He's also a JTS alum. And prior to joining Schechter, he worked at JTS for 24 years, and he taught so many classes and so many different programs for JTS, so we're excited to have him back. He also was an active contributor in our Torah commentary. So if you love Rabbi Berkowitz and you want to find more, we'll post the link in the chat a little bit later with his archive. We're going to have time for questions at 2 points during the session. So if you have questions, please send them to me and I will share them with Rabbi Berkowitz. And also my awesome and amazing colleague, Tani Schwartz Herman, is sharing links in the chat, but she also is here for technical questions. So if you're having trouble with hearing or those sorts of things, please feel free to reach out to her or me if you need to. We shared our sources for today in the email that you got as a reminder. We'll also be sharing them in the chat. And Tani will be sharing Rabbi Berkowitz's PowerPoint. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Rabbi Berkowitz and let him take it away. Oh, actually, there was one more announcement. We will be going a little long today. We'll be finishing at about 2:15 Eastern time. I know we have time zones all over the world, including Rabbi Berkowitz is doing this at night in Israel. So if you're like, oh, but I really have to jump off at the end time, that appointed end time, don't worry, this is recorded and we will post it, and you can find all of the resources there after the session. So without further ado, Rabbi Berkowitz.
Ellie, thank you so much for that enthusiastic and loving introduction. Erev Tov, good evening from Jerusalem, and Bruchim Habayim, welcome. It is so wonderful to gather in this visual Beit Midrash of ours. And I think I'm going to be smiling through the entirety of this session because I see so many wonderful, familiar faces. So in many ways, I feel like this is indeed a family reunion. I want to begin with a note of hakarat hatov, a note of deep appreciation To Ellie Gettinger of the Jewish Theological Seminary, thank you so much for this invitation from my alma mater, an employer of some 24 years. It is such a joy to be back home here in the JTS space, and an even greater joy that here we are, JTS and the Schechter Institutes partnering on this program. 2 years ago, when I wrapped up my tenure with the Jewish Theological Seminary, I became vice president of the Schechter Institutes in Jerusalem. And what I want you to know is that we are your Israeli cousins. Schechter Institutes is comprised of 4 branches, 4 amutot, 4 nonprofits. Our Beit Midrash, our rabbinical seminary, which trains Israeli rabbinical students to serve in the Israeli context, serving communities all over Israel. We are affiliated with the Masorti, with the conservative movement. And then our 3 other branches of what we do are graduate school, which gives a master's degrees in a wide range of Jewish studies, including rabbinics, land of Israel studies, Jewish history, gender studies. We have Israeli educators, public workers that come to the Schechter Institutes. And in addition, we have new programs, new certificate programs in bibliotherapy and psychodrama that we started in the aftermath of October 7th as a way of wrestling with the trauma that Israel continues to deal with. The third of our branches is the Tali Education Fund, where we go into secular Israeli schools and increase the amount of Jewish learning in those schools. The whole idea is to nurture a pluralistic vision of Jewish education in the country. And then finally, our Midreshet Schechter branch, which is comprised of an arts and culture center in Tel Aviv, in Neve Tzedek. And in addition, we have a center of Jewish outreach in Kyiv that supports 4 Jewish communities all over the country. We also run a Ramah camp for 165 Ukrainian kids in the western part of the country. And you can imagine how important that effort has been as we think about the horrific war that Ukraine has experienced. I also want to acknowledge that we are all living through a very, very challenging time in Israel and the Jewish world. And we pray intensely for the return of our hostages. And we continue to navigate the seemingly endless war in Israel and the rise of anti-Semitism throughout the world. This particular moment is one of gravity, crisis, and sadness. 570 days of war. I want to believe that we are between destruction and revival. Our learning in this space can help us rediscover core values that we share in our Zionist hopes and dreams, especially this week as we celebrate the 77th year of independence of the State of Israel. That said, I want to ask if you could please post a word or phrase in the chat about what you are most concerned about vis-a-vis Israel in this moment. So just take a moment to do that. I want to begin with those concerns, those prayers. The chat is indeed open, so you can begin putting those concerns in the chat. And without further ado, let's jump in. I see hostages, concerns of civil war, democracy, Orthodox overreach, peace, hatred from within, democratic character of Israeli society, pluralism, Netanyahu, hostages, right? Recurring themes that we see over and over again. Thank you for caring so deeply about all of us here in the State of Israel. The overarching title of the session that we're about to jump into is The Art of Zionist Thought and Israeli Identity. Over the next hour, we will explore resilience, inspiration, and identity through the material culture, specifically visual arts of the Jewish people. At this moment, I want to ask Tani to share our PowerPoint. And the first image that you're going to see in the PowerPoint is a classic photo of none other than Theodor Herzl. Theodor Herzl's dates are 1860 to 1904. He is known as Chozeh HaMedina, the visionary of the state. I would go so far as to say he was the prophet of the modern state of Israel. Here he is staring intensely into the Rhine River, a photo taken during the 5th Zionist Congress in December 1901. And as I mentioned, the 5th Zionist Congress, I want to remind all of you that are here on this Zoom that if you haven't voted in the Zionist Congress elections, I want to encourage you to do so. As a result of those who vote in favor of Merkaz, of the party of the Masorti, of the conservative movement, we are allotted millions of dollars, right? Very, very significant amounts of money, right? But it takes your voting in the diaspora to make that happen. Ellie is putting the link to voting, so please take note of that. And if you haven't voted yet, all it takes is $5 to register to vote. Make it happen in the coming days. Let that be the blessing that you give to the pluralistic Jewish world so that we can continue to live with both Jewish and democratic values in the state of Israel. So here's Herzl staring off into an unknown horizon. I want to believe it was more of a hopeful horizon than the Europe he was turning his back on. Today, we struggle with the events of October 7th, which color the world that we live in and obscure the horizon in the distance. It's very difficult for us today to perceive a horizon. And so I want to turn to a very beautiful poem by Gali Ravitz, which talks about this notion of horizon. Gali writes the following: "This is a period in which it is hard to speak of horizon. It seems that there is not anything on the horizon." We move ahead to 2 slides. We'll see the poem. There we are. "This is a period in which it is hard to speak of horizon. It seems that there is not anything on the horizon, and yet, when I close my eyes at night before sleep, I remember dreams and the places I wanted to be. My children, my loves, and I become weightless like a seagull soaring over high, drawing me a line and fly in its direction." So to understand modern Israeli art, we have to locate ourselves at a specific starting point, and that is Europe in the late 19th century. Jewish art at that point was clearly influenced by the Western perception of the Orient, as well as the belief that art has a profound influence on the national spirit. In 1850, Richard Wagner, who you see in the next slide, infamously wrote, and Richard Wagner is the small portrait that you see here. I did that deliberately. He wrote that, quote, "Jews are an unpleasant freak of nature. They are perverted in spirit and incapable of artistic expression," unquote. Wagner's answer was utter and total assimilation of the Jewish people into the German nation. Martin Buber, on the other hand, who you see just to the right, one of the greatest Jewish philosophers of the 20th century, agreed with Wagner's analysis, but came to a very, very different conclusion from Wagner. His answer was a movement of national independence for the Jewish people, one that would bring us to self-determination. And so in order to begin this journey, we need to understand the breakdown and failure of emancipation in so many ways. That is what gives birth to the Zionist movement. This iconic painting that you see now in the next slide is from 1899, the work of Samuel Hirschenberg, 1865 to 1908, a very famous Jewish artist from Lodz who found his way to Warsaw, Paris, and eventually to Palestine. This painting, not surprisingly, is entitled "The Wandering Jew." You look at this haunting image in the center of this piece. And part of what you need to know to truly understand the drama of this painting is that it is massive, 9 feet by 11 feet. Samuel Hirschenberg was the first artist to be invited by none other than Boris Schatz to the Bezalel Art School, the first art school, right, of Free State Israel. And it was this painting that greeted you as you entered the lobby of the Bezalel Art School. So you can imagine the power of all of this, right? You see this haunting figure in the center. The canvas itself is deliberately in the shape of a doorway or portal. Our central figure is running in terror. Bodies of countrymen, women strewn on the ground, wounded and bleeding. The play of light that we see, the sun setting in the background, on the left side, light or illumination in the foreground. It raises the overarching question, of course, what are we running from and what are we running toward? Right, there's this very, very haunting image, and you see also that the figure is surrounded by crucifixions representing the persecution of the Jewish people in the old country. It's a longing for another land, another place, a longing for a homeland. Chaim Nachman Bialik, who was the pre-state laureate of the Jewish people, wrote in this excerpt that you see in the next slide, it's entitled El Tzipor, to the bird. Greetings, peace to you, returning lovely bird. Tell the wonders of that distant land from which you came. Do they know and could they picture how the many rise against me? How their hatred swells, singing, O my birdling, sing the wonders of the land where spring forever dwells. Another painting that we see in the next slide, also from Samuel Hirschenberg, is entitled The Black Banner from 1905. You see masses of Hasidic men carrying a black draped coffin, the victim of a pogrom. 2 terrified faces stare at us, haunting faces, and on top of the coffin that we see being escorted, there is an open book of Chumash, right? An open Bible as if it's crying out to the heavens, right? Asking God, Ayeka, where are you? Where are you in this moment? Leo Pinsker, one of our classical Zionist thinkers from Odessa, who lived from 1821 to 1891, wrote in an essay entitled Auto-Emancipation, an Appeal to His People by a Russian Jew. He wrote the following in 1882, and this you could find in the source packet. He wrote, the essence of the problem lies in the fact that in the midst of the nations among whom the Jews reside, they form a distinctive element which cannot be assimilated, which cannot be readily digested by any nation. The Jewish people has no fatherland of its own, though many motherlands, no rallying point, no center of gravity, no government of its own, no accredited representatives. It is everywhere a guest and nowhere at home. The ghost-like apparition of a people without a land or other bond of union could not fail to make a strange and peculiar impression upon the imagination of nations. To sum up, for the living, the Jew is a dead man. For the natives, an alien and a vagrant. For property holders, a beggar. For the poor, an exploiter and a millionaire. For patriots, a man without a country. For all classes, a hated rival. You hear the echo of Pinsker's words in the world that we're living in today, of course. And then, of course, the next painting that we see, this very powerful painting by Maurice Minkowski, a Polish Jewish painter from 1910. And this painting is entitled After the Pogrom. What do we see here? A somber group of homeless women and children who take a moment to rest on their flight following a pogrom. Their dark-hued clothes and makeshift bundles add to their sense of displacement and despair. They're locked in their own worlds. Each of these figures is isolated from one another as they contemplate the sorrowful present, the uncertain and frightening future that they face. Of course, the reality of pogroms Pogrom, a word which comes from the Russian, to destroy, to wreak havoc, to demolish violently, unquote. Right? These anti-Jewish rampages which swept across the Russian Empire in the late 19th century, and especially in the Pale of Settlement. Emile Fleury, in the next slide, created this particular print of a photograph after the Kishinev pogrom of 1903. 49 Jews were killed, 92 were gravely injured, a number of Jewish women were raped, over 500 were lightly injured, and 1,500 homes were damaged. Poet laureate, who I mentioned before, Chaim Nachman Bialik, out of this experience of being invited to Kishinev to take testimony from the survivors of that pogrom, wrote his epic poem entitled The City of Slaughter. I encourage you to read this poem in its entirety. Here we have just a small excerpt from Chaim Nachman Bialik's poem in the next slide. He wrote, "Crushed in their shame, they saw it all. They did not stir or move. Those who survived this foulness, how did their menfolk bear it? How did they bear this yoke? They crawled forth from their holes. They fled to the house of the Lord. To the rabbi's house they flitted. Tell me, O Rabbi, is my wife permitted to me? The matter ends and nothing more, and all is as it was before, concealed and cowering, the sons of Maccabees." What I want you to keep in mind is that Chaim Nachman Bialik, who wrote this poem, is a product of the traditional yeshiva world. And yet, what is Bialik doing in this poem? Just from this small excerpt, you see he is unleashing a venomous critique against rabbinic Judaism and rabbinic Jews. He is decrying the passivity of the rabbinic world. How could it be that all the menfolk care about once they come out of their shelters after the pogrom is my wife permitted to me? Why? Because the women were raped in the midst of this pogrom. That was their main concern. And what does Bialik remind us? He reminds us that these people, these very same people who are crouching in fear, are who? They're the descendants of Maccabees. They are the children of Maccabees. And so in so many ways, Bialik ignited, right, the Zionist movement through this poem entitled The City of Slaughter. Again, I encourage you to read the poem in its entirety. And this becomes a perfect segue into Boris Schatz's most famous sculpture, which was completed in 1894. And this was completed in response to the Dreyfus affair in France. Here we have the sculpture in the next slide of Matityahu, the father of Judah a Maccabee. And this is very much, again, in the spirit of Bialik. The Maccabees become the symbol, a guiding symbol of self-determination for the downtrodden Jewish people. Of course, Ephraim Moses Lillian, whose dates are 1874 to 1925, takes this a step further. He is known as the first Zionist artist. He is from Galicia, and between 1906 and 1918, he traveled to Palestine frequently. Here, in the next slide, you see an image that is inspired by none other than Parshat Shlach Lecha, from the book of Numbers, when it is that the spies go in to scout out the land of Israel. What is so striking about this image that Ephraim Moses Lillian created is this is the frontispiece, this is the title page of none other than Theodor Herzl's Altneuland, Old New Land, a fictional work that Herzl created in which he gives his vision, right, of what it is that Jerusalem will eventually look like in the 20th century. I encourage you to read the 5th chapter of this book, in which he details what it is that Jerusalem will look like. And he was right on par. You will agree with me that Herzl was a prophet. But what do we see here? Do these figures look Jewish? Not at all. Right? They are heavily influenced by the Greco-Roman world. right? Look at their muscular build, look at their naked bodies, right? Look at their, right, their physique, okay? These were taking inspiration, right, from a world other than the world that is familiar to us. This was part of injecting a sense of pride, a sense of strength into the Jewish people. And so it's quite interesting. Lillian also created the design for the first modern Jewish tapestry, which we see in this next slide. This is called an allegorical wedding, and this sits in the first gallery space of the contemporary Israeli art exhibit at the Israel Museum. This is from 1906. It was a gift of German Zionists to the head of the executive committee, David Wolfson. What do we observe in this tapestry? We see this very moving image of a wedding that is taking place. But what is the cultural influence? What is the feel, the thematic feel that we hold in the imagery that we see before us? The woman that we see there, the Kala, the bride, looks more like an Assyrian goddess than she does a Jewish woman. And the Khatan, the bridegroom that is standing next to her, looks more like an Assyrian priest. If you look to the right of this piece, right, you see a representation of the Jewish people enslaved. Right? You see the thorns of enslavement. This is galut. This is exile. And on the opposite side, on the left side, what do we have here? You see the angel that's blowing the shofar of redemption. This is the image that is representative of Geulah, of freedom, of redemption of the Jewish people. So again, what it is that Lillian is expressing here is a sense of renaissance, a sense of rebirth of the Jewish people. He is reminding us of ancient Israel, and that ancient Israel was a free and sovereign nation, and we need to aspire to the same vision in the early part of the 20th century. We need to recall our pride and our glorious past. And so we now turn to one of the most famous of Israel's artists, and that is Reuven Rubin. Reuven Rubin was a Romanian Israeli artist. He came to the Bezalel Art School in 1912, and he left after 1 year to return to his native Romania. He was born in the town of Czernowitz, and he wrestled his entire life, vacillated between Western modernism and the new life that was unfolding in Free State Israel in Palestine. He famously wrote the following, quote, "Romania was forgotten, New York far away. In Palestine, there was sunshine, the sea, chalutzim, pioneers with bronze faces and open shirts, the Yemenite girls, the children with enormous eyes. A new country, a new life was springing up around me. The world became clear and pure to me. Life was stark, bare, primitive. I painted as the birds sing without effort and joyfully." So our first case study here is a triptych painting. You'll see that the painting itself is divided into three. This is called The First Fruits. What do we see in this painting? In the center of the piece, let's look at the center and then work our way out to the periphery. In the center left, we see a Yemenite couple. They represent the authentic Jews, the authentic Jewish past. This was part of the Orientalist movement of the early pre-state artists. This was how they envisioned the authentic view of the Jew. And they felt it was the Yemenites, the Yemenite Jews that represented that. So there you have a Yemenite couple that's lifting their child as a symbol of their first fruits as they return to the land of Israel. And then, of course, to the right of them, we have chalutzim, these two images that represent the braveness and courage of the pioneers that are returning to the land of Israel. And there they are holding the fruits of the land. The watermelon that you see on the shoulder of this very, very muscular man, this atlas of a man, the bananas in his left hand, and then his partner kneeling on the ground, raising a Jaffa orange, right? There they are at the center of the drama that is playing out in the early years of settlement. And then we continue on to the periphery. What do we see on the periphery? Right? We see the image of the Arabs of the land, right? And there they are on the right side, right? In this image of wrapped up, sleeping, sleeping as the land remains desolate. And in the distance, you see a sabra cactus plant. And then, of course, the shepherd, this very, very pastoral image that we have on the left side of the triptych. Before we take a break, I want to turn to the next two images, which I love and I find absolutely fascinating. The next two images are self-portraits of Reuven Rubin. This self-portrait was painted in his native Romania in 1921. What do you notice about this? It's a very Jesus-like image. The green tone, very wan, very sickly. And of course, he's holding the palm of his hand out, just as Jesus, in many, many paintings, shows his stigmata, right? The wounds of his crucifixion, right? This is the suffering servant, Reuven Rubin, in his old country. Now, what a difference 2 years make. 1923, here we have Reuven Rubin in Tel Aviv. Take a look at this self-portrait and notice the dramatic difference in the next slide. Wow. Look at the light. Okay, look at the background that we have there. Here he is on the sand dunes of Tel Aviv, holding his brushes in his right hand. And then, of course, the lily that's blossoming. The lily is a symbol of hope, a symbol of looking toward the future. Look at the color of his skin. He's bronzed. He is full of life here, right? The man is transformed. He has had a facelift, right? Should only be that Aliyah helps all of us to become youthful in this way again and to become energized. And of course, in the next slide, we see the sand dunes of Tel Aviv. This is when you all should have invested in real estate in Tel Aviv. So before we continue, I want to pause here, take a deep breath, and give you a chance to ask questions, enter some questions into the chat.
Thank you so much. One of our commentators noted that the Hirschenberg painting also looks a little like Samson destroying the Philistine temple. So there's also this like internal Israel, like how yes, it's a diaspora image, but there's also this like who's in power in the land as well. And someone else.
Observation. All of these paintings that I'm sharing with you, by the way, I really consider this an exercise in visual midrash. And I believe Shivim Panim La Torah, that there are 70 faces to Torah. Art enriches the experience of Torah in so many ways, and it enriches our experience of Israel. That's part of what I want us to connect to through this time together. Ellie?
I'm interested in this, I think that it's surprising to me in this study of how quickly the Orientalism is. I think I anticipated that was a later development and not so like at the turn of the 20th century. This is the medium that people are utilizing. Was there a kind of, and I don't know if this is something that you have kind of in your back pocket, is this part of a broader Orientalist movement, or is there a real sense that we need to reestablish a visual culture to reflect a new state?
It was definitely part of the classical Orientalist movement, and I believe part of what was at play is not only these artists, but in particular, Zionist Jews were turning their back on the past. They felt that there had to be a clean break with the reality that they were living in. Right? And why did there need to be this clean break? Because clearly, this was a very, very dangerous place for the Jews. We needed to regain our freedom, our independence, our self-determination. And so part of that, it was not only ideological, but it also happened, it had to happen within the material culture as well. And so these artists were looking for other role models of what it is that they could represent in their work. That's why the attraction to Yemenite Jews became so distinct and so strong in what it is that we see in the early days. And we're going to see more of that in just a moment when we see the very, very powerful sculpture of Yitzhak Danziger.
And just in terms of these kinds of symbols of rebirth, that it's interesting that, on some level, the art Reuben is casting himself as Jesus, but then also, reflecting on this as, that he's using these traditional non-Jewish symbols. One of our participants pointed out that the lily is also a symbol of rebirth, but I think that is a more traditionally Christian symbol. So that
Absolutely.
the ways in
Yes.
which, because the dominant medium of art is Christian images, how that these are being then turned on their head by Jewish artists. So I feel like, is there something that you could say about that, like and how that worked in terms of both the medium and also, is there a separation at some point that, hey, we don't want to be part of these kind of traditional Christian iconography pieces?
Right. Reuben was clearly playing off of Christological imagery. Right? It's so obvious when we look at these pieces. In addition, the way he created that large triptych painting in 3 parts, the moment one sees a triptych, the immediate association that we have, and this comes originally from Christian culture, is that this is sacred art, this is holy art. So the idea was that these artists were creating a sacred culture going forward. This was going to be a new experience of redemption for the Jewish people, a second coming, as it were. And so you're right, there was the direct connection with the image of Jesus, but there was also, a break that was being made here as well as we look forward as a Jewish people.
And I know we have so much more to cover, so I want to get back to it because I want to make sure we have time to get through more of your presentation. But thank you so much, and I'm excited to see where this goes.
Thank you. Okay, so now I want to turn to Yitzhak Danziger. So after Tel Aviv, we're leaving the sand dunes of Tel Aviv. How Tel Aviv has changed. Now we turn to Yitzhak Danziger. Yitzhak Danziger, who you see here, was a German Israeli artist. His dates are 1916 to 1977. He was born in Berlin and died in Ramla. He came to Palestine in 1923, emigrated with his family at the age of 7. And between 1934 and 1938, Danziger studied art and sculpture in London. It was there that he made the acquaintance of Avram Melnikov. And it was out of that experience that the next creation that you're going to see was born. Danziger took note of an art contest in the land of Israel. And it was a contest to create a sculpture that would sit at the entryway of the Archaeological Institute at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And so Danziger sat down to brainstorm who would be the most appropriate hero of the Jewish world that he could create a sculpture of. And so he wanted to identify a figure from the heroic past of the Israelite people. And so what did he do? He went back far into our scriptures, and he ended up turning to Genesis chapter 10, verse 8. Okay, and what do we have here? We have the genealogy of Noah. Okay, and I'm correcting this slide. It's chapter 10, verse 8 that you should see here. And we read there, Cush, okay, who was the grandson of Noah, became the father of Nimrod. He was the first on earth to be a mighty man. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore, it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The beginning of his kingdom was Bavel and Erech and Akkad and Calneh in the land of Shinar. From that land, Ashur, he went forth. What are we able to glean from these couple of verses from the book of Genesis? It seems that Nimrod was not only the first mighty man, strong man, but he was the first imperialist in human history. And as a result of what it is that we read here, he was demonized in rabbinic literature. They saw Nimrod as a villain. And not only did they see him as a villain, it's fascinating how it is that the rabbis pay such attention to the nuance of the Hebrew language. They looked closely at his name, Nimrod. Nimrod, when you hear that name, you also hear the root of that name, mered, rebellion. And they say what Nimrod did is he rebelled against God. Well, Yitzhak Danziger came along and he decided that he was going to redeem the image of Nimrod. And so he created this very, very famous sculpture. This is perhaps the most famous Israeli in the country. And the sculpture that you see on the next slide was finished in 1939. It was made of Nubian stone. His name is Nimrod. Okay, here we see the profile of Nimrod. You can see the original sculpture of Nimrod, which is at the entryway to the Gallery of Contemporary Israeli Art in the Israel Museum. I encourage you to go on your next visit to Israel and have an I thou moment with Nimrod. Okay, Nimrod created quite a stir when he was created. He is made of Nubian stone, right, that was taken from Petra. Apparently, it was brought from Petra to Tel Aviv. And you see, this is a very, very alien looking figure, alien as far as the Jewish people. Now, here you see Nimrod from another perspective. When we look at the next slide, you'll see his front, his back, the falcon on his shoulder, right? This image of a hunter, right? Look at his eyes, right? The flat nose that we see of Nimrod, his build, okay? And he has an archer's bow on his back. Right? He is on the hunt. The falcon is an extension of Nimrod's body. The entire sculpture can be seen as a fighting machine. Nimrod is a man-beast, a hunting instrument, flaring nostrils, inhuman, telescopic falcon eyes, made of this reddish Nubian stone. And it's a time capsule in so many ways of a Nabatean past. It's linked to the ancient art of Assyria, Egypt, and Greece. Many artists and art scholars who analyzed Danziger's work say that this was a personal reaction to none other than Kristallnacht of November 1938. Right? This was his gesture of revenge at his native land. He was rising up and saying that we do not have to be passive in our destiny, that we can fight back. Right? And so Nimrod became a very, very powerful symbol for the early Zionist movement, right, for the pre-state years. Again, I mentioned before how the root of Nimrod is rebellion. It's also interesting to think and reflect on what Zionism was, which was a rebellion against traditional Judaism, against rabbinic Judaism, where traditional Judaism preached passivity, that we had to wait until the time of the coming of the Messiah to have a homeland of our own and to return to our place. Zionism was saying, no, we have to take our destiny into our own hands. We need to come back. I want to move very, very quickly through the next series of slides to show you the journey. This is Abel Pan from 1935, the four matriarchs. Their faces are based on Bedouin women. That's the place that Abel Pan took inspiration from. Again, very, very similar to connecting the authentic image of the people with Yemenite Jews. Here, in the next couple of slides, we have art in the service of nation building, which was clearly influenced by the art of Russia, right? Communism that we see here. As we continue, right, with these posters from the early Zionist period, right, of pioneers, right, we come to Israel Paldi, right, a landscape from 1928. Right, these are very, very there we are, landscape from 1928, right? A very, very pastoral image of what Israel looked like once upon a time, right? To see this, you have to head north to see fields like this to see open fields, or Ori Reisman's Carob Tree Avenue that we see in the next slide. Ori Reisman was a very popular painter in the 1960s. David Reeb in this next piece, right? Green Line with Green Eyes from 1987. And I want to turn to a very, very powerful photograph from one of Israel's best known photographers, and that is Adi Ness. This is a work of his entitled The Last Supper. What a shock. From 1999. This is in the collection of the Israel Museum. And what is it that we have here? Right? Again, it's fascinating when we think about this particular photograph in connection to Reuven Rubin, playing off of what Ellie was pointing out earlier, the Christological imagery that we see in Reuven Rubin's paintings. So too here with Adi Ness. Adi Ness was born in Kiryat Gat in 1966, a town in southern Israel. He now works in Tel Aviv. And what he has become best known for is choreographing photographs based on biblical stories. And this is one of his most well-known photographs. So what appears to be a very, very routine photograph of soldiers eating is anything but. It's a carefully staged scene showing Ness's characteristic attention to detail. It was obviously inspired by Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper, and it depicts one of the most dramatic moments in the story of Christ, the announcement of Judas's betrayal, which led to the crucifixion and the ultimate sacrifice. In Israeli society and art, the soldier is often represented as an object of reverence. Brave and confident, he is heir to the mythical figure of the pioneer. So Ness chooses to emphasize the youthfulness of the soldiers in transition from adolescence to adulthood, from innocence to disenchantment. Here they are facing the greatest danger of all, the risk of dying in battle. Ness's analogy between the iconic Christian scene and Israeli reality conveys a political message regarding commitment and sacrifice. Like Christ's apostles, the soldiers are disciples of an ideology, a power stronger than themselves. But they are also victims of a geopolitical constellation over which they have no control. Notice too the bullet holes that you see in the wall behind them, right? Cigarette smoke, a bitten apple, which is a symbol of transience, right? And all of this reminds us that this might be indeed their Last Supper. The soldier that's sitting in the middle, right? Look too, you've got this background of the desert behind him, but also that bush, which looks like a crown of thorns. Right? It's absolutely amazing how Adi Ness thought of every single detail. And then the soldier all the way to the left is looking off into this uncertain distance. Brings us back to where we began, an uncertain horizon. Right? What is it that's around the corner? In the next slide, we have another of Adi Ness's photographs, right? Very, very iconic. You did a whole series on Israeli soldiers, right? That sense of bonding, right? And onward and upward as we go forward. Next slide. Right, this photograph is by Sharon Yaari, another very famous photographer in Israel. This was taken in 2000. It's called Mother and Daughter. Right, what is the emotion that we feel in this particular piece? Right, one could say that it's awe that we feel, right? Looking out into the seemingly endless distance, right? One could also say it's a sense of shock. It's a sense of fear. It's a sense of uncertainty. We see the mother with her hand resting on her cheek, right? We wonder what it is that this mother and daughter are feeling in this particular moment. And yet I want to remind us all of how far we have come since that image of the wandering Jew of Samuel Hirschenberg. The state of Israel today is truly a miracle. 77 years of the Jewish people in their own land, nurturing Jewish and democratic values. And what has this led to? As we look at the next few pictures, I want to share some of what it is that we're celebrating. In this picture, we see an image of a group from Ofakim. Ofakim was one of the hardest hit towns on October 7th. And Ofakim has been for many years part of our Midreshet Schechter learning network. We have learning communities all over the state of Israel. On October 7th, 51 residents of Ofakim were killed. It was one of the hardest hit towns on October 7th. And of course, the section of the town that suffered the most was the poorest section of one of the poorest development towns. After October 7th, the director of their Resilience Center came to us and asked if Ofakim could partner with the Schechter Institutes to create a group that would be focused on healing modalities. And so we brought art therapy, we brought psychodrama, we brought bibliotherapy, we brought music therapy to this amazing, amazing group, mostly residents of Ofakim. But in addition, we had students participating in this group from other communities in Otef Aza, from the Gaza area. The woman that you see teaching in the black, her name is Anati Alkabetz. Anati was a student in our arts and also pastoral care programs at Schechter. And very tragically, her daughter was killed at Kfar Aza on October 7th. The daughter and also the daughter's almost fiance. Anati has been picking up the pieces of all of this. And I can share with you that just the experience of teaching this remarkable group in Ofakim has been a healing experience for her. So much of what has given us inspiration since October 7th is the extent to which Israeli society, civil society, has jumped in to help in so many ways. And in the next picture that we have here, right, we see, right, medical staff, right, that were helping out, right? And you know well that Israel led the world in vaccinations in the era of COVID. Not only that, right, Israelis came together in other ways, right? Taking care of each other, packing food for soldiers, right? We continue the next couple of slides. Right. Keep going. There they are packing food after October 7th. Right. I'll also share with you a very, very proud moment, which is that my remarkable wife, Nadia Levine, has been part of a group called Chamal HaMatok, right? The sweet war room, the sweet situation room. And what she has done is assembled an amazing community of bakers that come together every single Thursday. They bake mountains of cookies, chalot, cakes, everything that you can imagine, and they send those baked goods to military bases all over the country. They include notes to the soldiers, right, to raise their morale, and it is such a moving experience. These bakers receive notes in return. How touching it is that there are people out there that are caring for them so deeply. Right? We continue on. Right? Israel is a light unto the world as we move to the next slide. Right? Here we see Israeli rescue workers in Miami, right? After the collapse of that condo building, right? Israelis go all over the world in the midst of tragedies that rock other nations. And in that sense, right, we endeavor to be or Lagoyim, a light unto the nations. Very beautiful picture from when I served as JTS Director of Israel Programs. These are rabbinical students from a couple of years ago. JTS and Ziegler rabbinical students at the Shokin Institute, JTS's home in Jerusalem. Israel is an important part of the rabbinic journey. It is an essential part of rabbinic training. We believe deeply in that. And part of what we do at Schechter Institutes is we're not only training Israeli rabbinical students, we also have students from the Seminario in Buenos Aires that come to study at Schechter for the year, and JTS rabbinical students. And the power of studying at Schechter is they are immersed every moment of every day in Hebrew as the language of instruction. Onward as we come to the finish line. Martin Buber wrote in a powerful essay entitled Biblical Leadership, "It is always the same story. The purpose of God is fulfilled, as the Bible itself says in one place, not by might nor by power, but by my spirit. Lo v'chayel v'lo v'choach ki im beruchi." It is finding the balance between strength, right, and our spirit. And that is what makes the state of Israel such a miracle to us today. It's been an absolute privilege and honor to share with you the journey of Israel through its painting, its art, through its material culture. And I want all of you to know that you have a personal invitation to come visit us at the Schechter Institutes in Jerusalem the next time you're here. I urge you to come visit and come be inspired by everything that we're doing on the ground in Israel. It is such a special, and also come see what it is that we're doing in Tel Aviv. Go visit Neve Schechter, the Arts and Culture Center that we have in Neve Tzedek. A final note that I'll share with you that is so inspiring to us. We created an artist incubator at Neve Schechter of young Russian and Ukrainian Olim that escaped one war and of course ended up in another war. A group of 25 artists that came together. We were able to jump and give them professional support, artistic support, modest living stipends, and most importantly, their first Jewish connection in their lives. We created a sense of Jewish community, and our director of Midrashat Schechter, Rabbi Irena Gritsevskaya, who studied both at JTS and at Schechter, is our director, and she commutes between Tel Aviv and Kyiv. She is a wildly talented individual and another heroic Israeli that you need to meet when you get to Israel on your next visit. Ellie, I'm happy to take questions, comments, stay on a bit longer.
Yeah, no, so I think I'm sure we'll have some questions that come in. As I said, if people need to jump off, this will be posted on our events page. So you guys, and I shared that link in the chat. But I'm getting so many comments about what a fabulous presentation this is. And I think you've done really an impossible task here of taking us through 100 years of visual culture and the transition. I do think I want to go back to this kind of point where we go from these very pastoral, beautiful, sense of the land, importance of the land. And then there was because we're in a hurry, you went very quickly on the green eyes, green line. And I kind of to get a little bit more into that because it felt like that was a transitional point where the pastoral is becoming urban in some ways, but also the reflection of us and other is shifting. Can you maybe identify how that continues to play out in artwork?
So thank you, Ellie. So I want to say before I answer your question, your great question, is that we need a part 2, part 3, and part 4 to this. Okay, this was to whet your appetite. And I'm so happy that you're pointing that out, right? When we came to David Re'eb's painting, right, clearly, right, the juxtaposition of Tel Aviv against Intifada, right, that we have represented in that piece. Right. So at some point, right, as we go further into the 50s, 60s, especially after the Six-Day War, right, we begin to see, I wouldn't say it's an abandonment, but we see, I would say, a letting go of the idyllic image of Zionism and Israel, a recognition that there is a messiness and tension within Zionism that we need to be able to wrestle with. It's not just this dreamy return of the Jewish people back to the land of Israel, but we are wrestling with very, very real tensions and problems in Israeli society. Right. This is, here you go. Thank you for pulling that up explicitly. This is what, right, Ellie is, is showing here that, we're living in two very, very different worlds. Right. And notice the image of, right, the eyes, the green eyes that we see on the right side, right? Eyes of envy, as it were, that are looking toward the left side of Tel Aviv, right? The worlds are very, very distinct, right? Broken apart. Right? And so you do see this wrestling play out, right? We see it play out, even within the Jewish world, right? There are a number of artists that took on the challenge, right? When Israel was flooded with immigrants in the 1950s, early 60s, and was totally unprepared to absorb those immigrants, many of those coming from North African countries, from Eastern countries, were thrown into what are called mabarot, transit camps, right? And they were literally living on the periphery, right? Basic needs weren't being met, right? And there was, a sense that this was a stain on the soul of the Jewish people, that we weren't caring for these refugees, these immigrants properly. That's also reflected in some of the art that we see. So we see this very healthy conversation, of wrestling in the material culture as well. It makes us uncomfortable at times, but to me, that's the beauty of who we are as a people, that this is what sparks conversation. This is what sparks growth for us. This is what gets us thinking about, who we truly are as a nation.
What are the pieces in this year, as where it's 2025, it's the 78th anniversary, 76th,
77th
77th. Math
anniversary.
and I are having a moment. Um, you know, it's the 77th anniversary of the creation of the State of Israel. What are the kinds of material culture representations that you are considering as we are looking towards Yom HaAtzmaut this year? What are the kinds of ways in which visually you would say this is what's capturing the moment?
So,
Or poetically, or in any artistic medium.
okay, so look, perhaps another presentation that we need to do is the art after October 7th. Okay, there's been a proliferation of art in response to October 7th. And it's some of the most moving, meaningful, emotional art that the Jewish people has been witness to. So, I encourage you to take a look at some of those images that have been created, especially the work of Zev Engelmeyer. I'll share with you that the other kippah that I wear in Jerusalem is being partners in a studio project called Kol Ha'ot, which is in Jerusalem's Artist Lane. I have the privilege of being partners with Elisa Moss Rabinowitz and her wildly creative and visionary father, David Moss. And the exhibit that's currently in our space now is entitled Counting Up. Zev Engelmeyer is a famous Israeli artist who created caricatures of the hostages. Every single day of captivity, he created another caricature. Very powerful pieces that he created very simply with markers. And over Pesach, we opened an exhibit. Zev Engelmeyer's installation is there. We went to Tel Aviv to collect his markers, about 580 of his markers. And we created an installation of his markers as if they were counting the days of captivity. And then the evening that we opened the exhibit, he added another marker, right, representing this horrific counting that the entire Jewish world is engaged in. Another artist that is exhibiting in the space created earrings representing, different feelings and images that she's been wrestling with. A very, very talented artist by the name of Rina Bennett, a paper artist in Jerusalem, created this image of a broken heart. And in the midst of the crack of the heart, there's this burst of strips of paper coming out. And what she did is she took the masking tape numbers, right? This has become a tradition that was sparked by Rachel Goldberg Poland, putting the number of the day of captivity, right? Wearing that. She took all of these masking tape numbers that she saved over all of this time and created this remarkable collage piece. So it's unfolding, right? Like Revelation continues, so too, the material art continues. I'll also share with you too, one of the pieces that you could see on the Kol Ha'ot website. We commissioned 14 Israeli artists to create commemorative posters of October 7th. And this was an exhibit that opened over Sukkot. We asked each of the artists to take a verse from the 3rd chapter of Kohelet. That's the very, very famous chapter of, right, a time to mourn, a time to rejoice, a time to weep, a time to laugh, etc. Right, what's known as Shir Ha'itim, right, the poem of time. And we asked them to weave it into a project known as Ot Chaim. What Ot Chaim did is they took the handwriting of soldiers, Israeli soldiers, that have been killed since October 7th. And they created downloadable fonts using the handwriting of these soldiers. An amazing project. Put it into your web browser, Ot Chaim, and it will come up. You can put the website into English. It tells the story of each of the soldiers, and you can download the fonts. So we asked each of the artists to take the handwriting of one of those soldiers, to weave it into a verse of Kohelet. These are just some examples of how the art continues to play out in modern Israel today.
Well, and it's interesting because so many of these projects are so personal and so connected to individuals, as opposed to the kind of sense of those early portraits, which are creating this like uber. Well, in some ways, like, and someone was pointing this out towards like a connection to Ayn Rand and the sense of the Ubermensch and those pieces. That it is like it's a say, instead of the sense of this is Israel, it's this is Israel in all of our variety and all of the ways, that we don't have to craft a universe that says this is a universal identity, that these are the many identities and the many tragedies and the many and hopefully many joys that make up a cultural entity.
I don't know if you meant it, Ellie, but I love the pause that you had there. This Israel, and this is real. This is real. Okay.
I
And
didn't, but I'll take it.
I
um,
love that you did that.
One of our participants is like, can you send all of these links? And I will try to do my best to get these links into a document that can go on our website so that we can say, here's the oat
Hello.
pieces
Sure.
and all of these pieces, because it is so interesting and so fascinating. And it's the sort of thing that you're like, I want to spend time in these websites exploring. I, I this has been lovely. I really appreciate this expansion and opportunity to explore Israeli history in a kind of different way, that it's not about, here's it is in some ways a narrative focus, that you were on a timeline and trajectory, but it was a visual timeline, and it was such a intriguing way to explore Jewish history and Israeli history particularly.
Thank you. And as we really do come to the finish line, I want to return to the chat, and I want to ask each of you to please put a blessing for Israel. In this week of independence of Yom HaAtzmaut, please type in a blessing for Israel that you have, and just let the floodgates open. I want all of us to see these blessings flash across the screen. The chat is open officially by Ellie. So let those brachot flow. What's your blessing for Israel in its 77th year? Peace and return of the hostages. Peace. We cannot have enough peace. May you be a light unto the world. Opening of everyone's hearts. Amen. Ken Yehi Ratzon, let it be. Societal unity and respect. Joy again. Shalom. Learn to listen to each other. Presence. Yivarechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha. Right? May God bless you and keep you, Israel. Beautifully said. Thank you, Mark. Love and kindness with all.
I'm getting, the sense of chills and, this is what we hope for. And maybe as a group, we can send our prayers up and we can share this kind of feeling as a Jewish world and with our community in Israel.
I wish I could have all of you in Israel all the time. We need you here. We need you and your brachot, your blessings here. And I'll also say in the same breath that we need each other. The diaspora community is so important to Israel, and Israel is so important to the diaspora community. So please never lose sight of that. I thank you all for making time for this joint session between JTS and the Schechter Institutes. Ellie, let's make this happen again very soon.
Do
Let's
it.
not wait too long to make it happen. It is so important that we really are family and that we really do many, many joint programs together. Thank you so much for being here. I want to say Chag Sameach, Chag HaAtzmaut Sameach. Have a very meaningful Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut this week. And Mazal Tov to all of us on Israel's 77th birthday.
Thank you. Again, thanks to Rabbi Berkowitz for sharing with us this and kicking off this series in such a beautiful manner. We will be continuing the series next week with Dr. Ilan Ezrahi, who is also a JTS alum, who's an expert in Jewish peoplehood and particularly peoplehood in Israel. And so we're going to be exploring some of the things that I think we've been pointing to today, the sense of fragmentation and cohesion and how the two can exist on the same hand. We hope to see you again next week. And I'll work on getting all of these links into our resource guide so that we can share those as well. Again, Rabbi Berkowitz, thank you so much for your time and energy. And thank you to the Schechter Institute for partnering with us on this program.
And Chodesh Tov to all of us. A very happy month of Iyar. May it bring Bisorot Tovot. May it bring good news. And most importantly, may it bring our hostages home.
Amen.